the consciousness is floating up, and it's very much me at this point. It's my personality. It's playful. It's goofy. It's curious. And it's looking, why is everyone wearing these outfits? And then I like zoom in and realize it's me. They're working on me. And there was still enough ego identity for the consciousness to begin to panic and to want to bolt back into the body or protect it. And at that very moment that this very human primal function is coming over what's left of my connection to the material brain, I'm yanked out of that space.
Today, I'd like to welcome Brooke Grove to Conscious Conversations. Welcome, Brooke. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I know it's taken us a while, we can say that, a while to get here, but it finally aligned. And I'm so excited to have you share your story and your experience here with my audience. So, with that being said, why don't we just get right into anything that you want to share leading up to your near-death experience and your near-death experience?
Okay. Well, when I was in graduate school for my master's, I started having this sudden onset of symptoms. They didn't follow a pattern at first, but they were significant. For example, I went from being a severe asthmatic to being diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder at 23 years old. I was having joints that locked up all the time. They would discolor wherein I couldn't type my thesis. I would catch anything anyone had. It was as if my immune system was crumbling and no one could explain why. Now, juxtaposed to this, I was writing about my childhood trauma. And at the time, I had poor boundaries. I had basically been told by an advisor it would be a better paper than what I had proposed on another modality and another population. And wanting to people please and be a good student, I went ahead and followed her advice rather than my body's intelligence. And as I went deeper and deeper into that process, which I was not emotionally and psychologically prepared for, the body screamed louder and louder. I saw a multitude of physicians throughout Los Angeles, yet kept receiving different diagnoses. I did complete the paper and graduate top of my class, but I next went immediately into my doctoral program, which did not help things. Taking 20 credits when your body's disgruntled doesn't do much for the system. And so at that point, it starts to become very, very severe. I intuitively, at this time, before my NDE, said, I feel that the trauma is what was the catalyst for all of this, and that my body might be releasing things. But what we have to acknowledge is that this was a different timeline. This is basically 2005 through 2010. Mind-body medicine was not where it is today. Also, the understanding of trauma was not where it is today. Furthermore, clinical psychology was just beginning to acknowledge these aspects of the psyche and the mind-body connection. And so even though I had now been licensed and was working as a therapist, medical doctors basically laughed at me when I said I thought my childhood trauma was causing all of this. I was told I had legitimate physical diseases and that I needed to consider chemotherapy because at this point, my liver and lungs were failing. I'm stubborn to a fault, and I maintain that something was wrong with their diagnoses. And so I opted to go back east, which is where my parents live and is also the home of Johns Hopkins University. They, at the time, had the world's leading autoimmune research center. And so I fought for an appointment to get in there, as at this point, I believe I'd had about 8 or 10 autoimmune diagnoses, none of which stuck, and none of which were consistent in the testing. And so I fly to Maryland to get this appointment. But prior to the appointment is when my NDE occurs. I am awaiting Hopkins. I'm really jazzed in the sense that I might actually have hope. At this point, I'm still maybe 29 years old, and I've been since really sick since 25, but symptomatic since 23. And so I wanted to really get hold of my health so that I could maintain the goals I'd invested so much in. I'm happy, and then what happens? A flare up hits. And it's not a benign flare up, it's not one I can function in. I had gotten the appointment last minute, so my family happened to be on a cruise. So I'm in their huge house alone. I call the doctors to say my knees are now locking. I can't get up the stairs to the kitchen. It's in the basement apartment, and I need food. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. No one's around. And they're like, you're in severe pain. The pain's increasing your anxiety. Just double up your medication. Nothing will come from doubling it up. It's all safe. We've prescribed it to you. Well, unbeknownst to them, they had focused on the lungs and the kidneys. My liver was failing. So when I took that medication at a double dose, instantaneously the liver failed. When the liver failed as rapidly as it did, I fell, hit my head, resulting in a traumatic brain injury. My parents come home. I'm on the ground. I'm purple everywhere you can see. I'm already jaundiced. I was swelling up. I think they said it looked like 10 to 15 pounds of water, like immediately. And that's the first grace of my NDE. They came home early and find me like that.
Okay, so I'm really curious. You mentioned that they were on a cruise.
Mhm.
So, from the time that you took the medication and your liver failed and you fell and hit your head,
Mhm.
how long was that before your parents came home and actually found you?
It had to be no more than a few hours, or I would have died from the liver intensity and injury.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I was just curious. I was thinking, gosh, were you there for a whole week while they were on this cruise?
Oh, no, that's a great question. Great question. So no, by the grace, they came in early. They were supposed to stay a couple days at the port, and they decided to come home, and they found me like that.
Yeah, miracle. Okay, continue. I just had to ask that question.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. And so they find me like that. They don't know what's going on. They know I'm supposed to go to Hopkins. They get me to the local emergency hospital. And unfortunately, at that hospital, it's a very small town. They're more ill-equipped. They find out I'm going to Hopkins, so I'm taken by helicopter to Hopkins. My NDE for me begins in the Hopkins ICU. I have no memory of the helicopter, the fall, the basement. I do remember ICU. And so in ICU, this team is working on me with hazmat suits when my consciousness begins to depart the body. Now, as the consciousness begins to depart, it's still very much in this earth realm. It's still connected to the body. And so the consciousness is floating up, and it's very much me at this point. It's my personality, it's playful, it's goofy, it's curious. And it's looking, why is everyone wearing these outfits? Wow, this looks like an X-Files episode. What's Scully working on? And then I like zoom in and realize it's me. They're working on me. And there was still enough ego identity for the consciousness to begin to panic and to want to bolt back into the body or protect it. And at that very moment that this very human primal function is coming over what's left of my connection to the material brain, I'm yanked out of that space very lovingly, but also at the speed of light. So very quick. And I'm yanked from that space into what I can only describe as the cosmos. I've often said if you took a NASA picture, take their best telescope, the best photo, the highest vibration, it's not a fragment of the color, the luminosity, the awe that this space held. It was not all light. There were large pockets of voids and blackness. And yet at the same time, all of the light was clearly intelligent. All of it was benign. All of it permeated ineffable love, like poetry to the soul. It was as if shifting into that space instantly recalibrated and healed all of the fragmented pieces of my earlier life. And so, in this space, I am greeted immediately by these three beautiful celestial orbs. And they are the most intense ruby red, a beautiful emerald green, and a gorgeous amethyst. And it was so lovingly bittersweet insofar as I had been an intuitive child. And throughout my childhood, I was always talk about the angels I was playing with. And I called them red, green, and purple, like very simple. And my family was cool with it until it expanded and influenced other things. And then they thought it was witchcraft and it was anti the church and it was bad. And I suppressed all of those things. Yet when I was in that space, it was like, wow, you were more real than all of the other things. And I'm back with you. And I'm so joyous. And they didn't speak to me in our vernacular. They didn't use words. It was all telepathy and inner knowing. But through that, they did confirm that they were these same beings, that they had been with me, not just in childhood, but in lifetime upon lifetime. And without saying it in this human way, it was almost welcome home. You're back in the sanctuary, you're held. And so I was just so thrilled with that initially. And yet, there was this very high vibration and pulsation that was moving me forward, almost like a magnet that I couldn't say no to. And as I followed that magnet, I saw this source light or this one light or the creator light or the God light or the mother God light or the all that is light, whatever vernacular you choose, the really divine essence, the prime creator that we all come from. And of course, like every ND, all I wanted was to just jump into that and be enveloped in this juicy, yummy, truly unconditional love, something so foreign to what I had known on this earth walk. And yet, as I'm propelling towards it, all of a sudden my orb of consciousness just like halts out of nowhere. And the angelics didn't rush upon me to fix or change or answer. They just let me be in that space, that in between, because at this point I'm comatose and I was comatose 3.5 days. And it's hard to say when you're beyond space and time how that feels. Because to me, I'm summarizing this quickly, yet it felt like years when I woke up. And so as I'm sitting and marinating in this in-between place, they sort of stood back, yet still letting me know I was held. And then ultimately, as if my soul pondered the question to them, they let me know, you can go to it now. It is what you are. It is where you are from. It is where you will ultimately go. All things do. Or you can choose to go back. And of course, whatever part of my oversoul was still connected to this trajectory, to this lifespan, was like, no, not going back there. 30 years of trauma, enough for me. Take me over here, like bolt me. And it was at this point that the angelics gave me, for lack of better terms, a download or a vision of the possibilities of coming back. And they didn't say anything grandiose in the sense of like, it's your job and you are the one and you were chosen. It was nothing like that. It was this beautiful image of the earth in a way I've never felt or seen her. She's been wounded so much over the recent eons and in my lifetime. I've never felt this kind of vibration coming from it. But in this image, the earth was pouring out the same light of the creator light, just beaming it out in every direction. And surrounding the earth were these light beings, but they had hands. and the hands were all connected, and they were this beautiful citrine, just creating like an angelic halo around the earth. And with that image, they let me know the earth is changing, and you came here for a time wherein humanity would unify to accelerate that change. And the only way to be of service is to really have alchemized the pain, the suffering. The suffering was never a punishment, it was a gift to help you and others step up. And at that point, it was like electricity, like a flip had switched, and my oversoul remembered. And I said, I want to go back. And they were very clear with me. They didn't, sugarcoat it or put rose-colored glasses on it. They said, you will go back and it will get worse, but that period will be the last before you're propelled into another direction. And you know now that the soul is eternal, that we are with you, and that you are one of many here to do that work. And so I said, okay, game on, let's do it. Even though I would probably like slowly pulled back from that source light, but I did want to go back to the body. And so I said, well, how do I get to the body? We're in this beautiful cosmos space with, no direction, and everything is just infinite. And they tell me to look for the light unlike any other. And so at this point, I start looking for a light that's a different frequency or vibration or hue. And I encounter these two lights that are very different from the angelics. The intensity is much softer. They're not, they are not holding me. I had an intuitive call to hold them, but I had no idea why. And one was this fierce indigo blue, and one was this very soft green. Spirit said nothing to me in the space about those two beings at that point. So I just said, okay, cool, keep moseying on. And at that point, I see this horrendous, piercing light that turns out to be the flashlight from the nurse, putting it in my eye to check my vitals, and I am catapulted in. Boom. I'm back.
I just noticed as you were sharing how much resonance I had with that.
Mhm.
And I have so many questions, but I'm really curious about the two lights.
Mhm.
And were have you identified what those were? Like I got an intuitive sense that those were your kids.
Yes, and good intuitive sense. They were, but it would be, let's see, they told me I wouldn't have children after my coma. The organs had been so badly damaged, and without a liver, I wasn't expected to survive without a transplant. So it was a big surprise when 3 years later I became pregnant with my eldest son, and then 4 years later the other one. But yes, when my eldest was born, it was a very difficult birth, and yet when he finally came out and was held to me, it wasn't just the awesomeness of motherhood and this life-changing moment. He was glowing indigo. And so at that point, I was like, ah. And the other part of that was so touching is when I was a kid and I was going through all of this horrific familial abuse in a Catholic school where no one cared or would believe me, I would constantly pray for an intuitive, for someone like me, for someone who made me feel like family. And I would always see indigo. And then sure enough, he came in with that and answered those prayers all those years later.
That's so beautiful. That's so awesome. I definitely have a belief. I've not had a near death experience, but I do believe my kids are uh my angels. They've rescued me. I've gotten pregnant every time I've had to recover from a deadly addiction.
Mm.
And so as soon as you said that, I just felt like it was your kids and I had to ask. But I'm glad that you brought up your childhood because I'm curious about that. Now you mentioned that when you were a kid, you were playing with these angels and they were red and green and purple, amethyst is what I remember. Now, your parents were kind of like, oh, cool, until they weren't. So I'm curious what your upbringing was. You did mention Catholic school. Were you raised in a Catholic environment or did you have a spiritual upbringing or knowledge?
I was a strict Roman Catholic upbringing. My grandmother was fresh from Sicily, and if you didn't, like, if you were sick with pneumonia or the snow was like literally 3 feet high, she had it on the radio and you were genuflecting and saying your prayers. So, very strict Roman Catholic. My parents really, the variance there is that while she was alive, they constantly went along with it and like had me in parochial school and took us to mass. But in hindsight, I see that they were just really coddling her because as soon as she passed, that all dissolved. But as a child, you don't know that. And it's being forced upon you. And my grandparents really raised me more than my parents. So it had that stern influence. And at the parochial schools I attended back then, corporal punishment was still allowed at some of them. So that was another, reality.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty intense reality for sure. So when you had your near-death experience, was there any kind of shift in your beliefs about the universe or creation or the truths of the universe, or did that happen before? I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's a great question because I often talk about the after effects and what dramatically shifted, but I'm going to start with the before. Insofar, it was almost like spirit was sending me love notes that like something was coming. I had been studying clinical psychology. I was in my doctorate at that point, about to defend my dissertation. And suddenly I got guided to study transpersonal psychology, which for like a clinical doctor is the complete opposite. Okay. And I'm like, why are you guys guiding me this way? And why am I studying in the redwoods, like with people that like didn't see myself with and whatnot? And interestingly, when I was there, a shaman approached me. This was like in August, right before coma. Coma's in December. And she tells me, she's like, you're going to visit the in between and you have a choice. And she's like, I guess I'll see you next summer what you choose. And I'm all like, what does that mean? Like it was just so random. But there had been this guiding to alternative wisdoms and esoteric traditions that had amped up right before coma, but I took it as nothing more than a curiosity. It ended up that guidance to begin opening those doors is what saved me when I came back with my after effects, because there were the books, there were the resources, there were the people to help me. For me, the beliefs changed the minute I opened my eyes because I'm in ICU. I've got PICC lines to my brain. I'm intubated, so I'm strapped down to a bed. They did not realize I was in there when I first woke up. I had been declared brain dead with a 1% chance of awakening. So they thought I was having involuntary eye movement and whatnot. And so I stayed there, body locked for quite a while. And there was a lot of panic initially because my mind kept saying that was just like a lucid dream, or like you chose to wake up. You didn't choose to come back. You chose to wake up. So you're fine. This is all fine. And my rational analytic brain was very powerful at that time. It's what had carried me through school. It's the way that this world operates. And so I was in like masculine overdrive and not listening to the feminine side and not surrendering. And so I immediately kind of went to war with my beliefs because now I'm looking out through these eyes. And in the moments I couldn't communicate, I was certain, Christina, that they had given me the best drugs on the planet, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, everything has these colors and it's like moving everywhere. I feel like I'm coming off psychedelics. Why would they give me something like this? Like, I'm just like, this doesn't seem like it's helping the pain. But I start noticing the clinician, the scientist starts to help me because I start noticing that everything is responding to my emotions or my thoughts. Like, even if I look at the monitor and I change how I'm perceiving it or what I feel about it, the colors would change. And I'm all like, what is going on? So they finally take the intubator out. And again, I'm thinking this is some sort of after effect from drugs. They finally get the intubator out, and I say, please stop the drugs. Just make him stop. Like, I just want to feel normal. And the nurse starts laughing. She's like, sweetie, your liver failed. We can't give you Benadryl. And then I'm like, what do I tell them, that I'm seeing things? You
Right.
know, like, so I kept it to myself. And it wasn't until I was sitting in ICU here having all these doctors tell me the worst, like I told you about the kids, the walking, the talking, that I'd be in a wheelchair at 30 or 35 and, just nasty stuff. And anytime I would align with them, I would see this dark and gray and gross stuff come over me. And anytime I would choose my power and sort of block them, it would completely change. So in ICU at night is when the angelics really started teaching me frequency medicine. And that's how I personally healed the organs. But even after getting discharged with spontaneous remission and defying all of their outcomes, my mind for 7 years tried to rewrite this narrative because it wanted to stay in the ego identity I had worked so hard to create. And so it was just like recurrent ego death after ego death after ego death until I finally realized anytime I would go against what guidance was showing me, I would suddenly get sick again. It was as if my body had to be the wall to illuminate that. So yes, I mean, basically dismantling of all the beliefs and an openness to the infinite possibilities of the universe.
That makes so much sense though, that like your body was guiding you pretty much the whole time. And especially when you came back, it was like, we're not going down that road. And so I'm curious, you mentioned like ego death after ego death and 7 years. I'm curious if you'd talk about a little bit more in detail that process of how you transformed or transitioned from ego death to really embracing what I perceive as the truths of the universe rather than the illusions of this reality.
Mm. In the beginning, it was very rocky because every time I would go back into the Shadowlands, all of that like wounded child stuff would come up. And so much of that was what co-created coma. And because my body was physically healing at that time, the psyche and the mind just didn't want to go there. That was compounded by the fact that I was a clinician myself. And I knew very well that if I went into an office and spoke about what was happening to me in the psychic after effects realm, I would be pathologized. They would label me schizoaffective at best. I was constantly giving myself mental status exams to make sure that I was oriented times person, place, time, and situation so that I was not psychotic. Yet there were times I didn't understand like the ascension process. I didn't understand more light codes were coming in. I didn't understand what was happening at like this mass level to many people until much later. And so because that wasn't part of my knowing, and I had been around academics and clinicians and scientists for the past decade, I was very much isolated and I didn't trust priests per my history. I didn't trust clinicians for being one and knowing the limitations. And you have to understand in 2010, we're 14 years out. There were not the openness in intuitive and transpersonal modalities. When I studied transpersonal psychology, many people didn't know what that was. Now they're becoming mainstream. Okay. But at that time, they weren't there to my knowing. And so I kind of dibbled and dabbled. I would go really deep into the shadows. And I have to say, my understanding and my early obsession with Carl Jung somewhat saved me because I was able to look at like his own text of going into like a 5-year hole and just like letting all of the darkness come out and then being rebirthed. So I would constantly tell myself, you can't become the butterfly unless you're in the cocoon, and you can't get out of the cocoon unless you fall apart. And so it was this constant process of like, okay, I tried to defend my dissertation 3 times. Every time, and my story here, a lot of threes, 3 days, 3 organs, 3 angels, 3 years before my son's born. He was born on the 3rd in 2013, naturally. So they just keep coming up. It's like spirit's love language. Yet I tried to defend that dissertation 3 times, and every time was the only time the so-called autoimmune symptoms would come back on. So that was like the most profound of the ego deaths, because I had spent 13 years studying something, and suddenly I'm like, I have to pay back all this money and I'm not even going to use it. How am I going to support myself? What am I going to do? Like, I was just freaking out. So I kept trying to find ways to use what I'd been through, but I was premature. And this is where so much of my current thesis on integration and embodiment in my current work comes in, because so many people want to quantum leap from an awakening experience to service. You cannot do that. If you bypass the messy parts, you bypass being an authentic healer in integrity, and you cause harm. And so intuitively, I just pulled out of healing during those years. Every time a massive ego death would come through, I would say, okay, this is an invitation to explore those wounds. And though I didn't have money, spirit kept just showing up with these like earth angels. And so I would talk about a certain thing, and then someone's like, oh, you need to see this shaman. And so I was like, oh, you need to go to Peru. I'm like, I can't go to Peru. They're like, I have a house for you. And da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, I'm going. And so I went and studied with like indigenous shamanic elders, and they were able immediately, by perceiving my light body, to tell me so much that other people couldn't see. And when I had wisdom keepers look at me and validate and verify and teach me to ground, and the biggest thing they taught me was to come back into the body, because as a complex trauma survivor, a sexual abuse survivor, I was used to living out here. Dissociation was so much of what had caused the disease. And so my gifts, they're beautiful when you're up in the higher chakras, but the problem is you can't serve if you don't bring them down the inner channel and ground them. And so the shamanic culture really taught me how to use the earth, how to pull into her center and still stay connected, still stay open. And so it was little by little, but I mean, it wasn't pretty. The bumps, the scratches, I'm writing a memoir right now, and there's times when I'm just like, I don't even, I have to be very loving to all the multidimensional parts, but it's hard because you have to take accountability for that. You have to take accountability for your own toxicity. And the truth is, if we want to purge something, we have to be part of that cycle. We can't just put it on the perpetrators. There's co-creations in everything. And so there were years where, like many NDEers, my dark nights of the soul led to suicidal ideation. More often than not, it's what got me speaking about NDEs, because it was being bypassed at the time. And I was very fortunate that every time I got so close to wanting to just go back and give up and don't want this anymore, my guides would just do something miraculous out of nowhere to remind me of that flame, and that it was there through all of it. And there was a period, Christina, where I thought I was being punished. Like my ego was like, you must have done something wrong. You offended them. That's why this just gets, they said they were going to help you. They said this would stop, and none of it was happening. And I'm just like, if you feel abandoned, you feel upset. But when they would break through like that, it was always a reminder. They never shut me out. When I go low vibe, I shut them out. And so I learned all of these things. I had to learn about energetic boundaries. That's huge for a highly sensitive and an empath and a healer. I was a psychologist and psychotherapist. They never taught us that. So you're constantly picking up hijackers and hungry good. I had no awareness of that. And the first 7 years, I would say that's what's most crazy making. You'd be walking down the street and someone's covered with entities or whatever. If you're not boundaried up and they sense your light, they're jumping ship.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware and cognizant of what it feels like to have another consciousness feeding off of yours, it's very easy to think you are mentally ill and you are the problem. And so it was every time something like that would happen, I'd be like, oh, okay, let me learn. And eventually, about 8 years into this, I had what one of my teachers, Dr. Peter Levine, calls a great play box. And that is, instead of calling it a toolbox, like a big toy chest of all these modalities, of all of these knowings, of all these techniques, so that when something out of nowhere comes on, you know which toy to use. And through that lived experience, I started realizing, particularly after 3 of my NDE friends committed suicide in 1 year, that we can't keep not talk about this. We have to start breaking the silence. We have to start showing the awakening world that it's not all love and light. You've got to transverse the shadows to embody that. And there still always has to be a place for the shadows as long as we're in duality.
Oh, so many threads that I want to go down. So there's so much around what you said. Something that stood out during your NDE, and then some things that stood out after. So during your NDE, when they told you that you can choose to go back, they also gave you a vision of the the light workers like holding hands and creating a halo around the earth. And they also shared with you that it was going to be messy, that it was going to get worse before it gets better. And as you were sharing that, I was like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. But what you said was that, you have to integrate.
Mm-hmm.
And that really stood out to me because just like you mentioned, I have a lot of clients and a lot of people come to me and they just want to know how to jump timelines or, shift or manifest this like whole new reality. But we really do have to walk through
Mm-hmm.
the messiness, right? That's kind of where we're doing our learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about why we need to integrate, because I do feel I see it as a trend as well, like in the spiritual space that, everyone just wants to skip that. I'm one of them. I wanted to. I wanted to just, be done with my addictions, be in the light, and have my gifts and just move forward without any pain or heartache. So integration to me is so important. And with your experience, I'd love it if you could share more about that.
Yes, integration is where the holy work is. The transcendent experiences, beautiful as they are, they're temporal, okay? And as long as we're in human animal form, we carry all of the wounding as well as all of the wisdom. Yet we can't embody and truthfully share and heal with that wisdom if all the wounding patterns haven't been attended to. So quite often people have these like openings in the upper chakras or the heart. Okay. So they're connected above now and they want to go out and spread that message. But from the heart down, and the heart being the bridge of the chakra center, they're congested. There's all kinds of stuff. It's like fireworks down there. So they might be operating from here and they're like, yay, I'm done. Let me go spread the love. But all of a sudden, something sets off an activation, and then it's, which is why we see so many spiritual persons often seeming like they're hypocrites or they've abused their power because they weren't owning all of this. The reality is, as long as we're still embodied, we're still very human, we're still very flawed. So, integration is just really meeting the invitations that are still within your system post awakening, and there will be many. I have worked with experiencers and all sorts of people on the mystical path and plant medicine path for many, many years now. I can tell you, not one has ever come to me without a whole bunch of stuff being activated post awakening. So if we bypass that stuff, we're not actually able to embody the message. The light wants to run through a channel. That's how it's designed to go. That's also what the earth needs, because the earth then receives it through our root and through the earth star chakra. So in order for us to be balanced, and balance is everything, and it's part of the hardest integration work because it can feel so wonderful up here and we just want to stay here. But I can tell you from years of working with people and speaking around the world, you can't transmit pure light and energy if you don't have all of this well open. So to want to bypass that, as so many spiritual trends are doing, is just telling you about the integrity of the trend. Because the reality is, look at Buddha, look at Jesus. They all went away and faced their maras, their demons, their devils. They all did it. And if you're not doing that after awakening journey, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to have many more awakening journeys till you start to integrate that. You know, like a lot of people talk about how many NDEs or STEs they have, and I'm like, I'm trying to listen to spirit this time and not have like 12 of these things. Like, I don't need to keep integrating over and over. It's hard. But
Yeah,
it's the hard part is we're just taught to avoid pain in this culture. Like there's only certain emotions that are allowed. Anger is okay. Look at this culture right now. It's okay to be angry, but compassion, shame, I would say the most prolific one for so many people is toxic shame. And yet, because of the disgust and the vitriol it creates, we ourselves don't want to sit with it. And if we can't sit with our own pain, we can never fully pull this in because all pain wants to do is be loved. And if we don't deflect shame or we don't deflect our shadows or the monsters within, if we do, they transmute. If we ignore them, they get louder. So integration is really the foundation of embodied awakening.
I agree. And I love how you said, like, as long as we're here in this human form as this animal. So, my experience, I did not have an NDE, but I have recovered from many addictions. And I've had a lot of spiritual experiences as a result of those. But as I walked through recovery, which is hard, it is hard work. Uh, One of my sponsors said to me that you are having these experiences so that one day you can help someone else through their experiences. And so for me, that integration is actually so worldly. Like we chose to come here to integrate, to incarnate in these bodies for a reason. And so if we're trying to bypass, we're skipping a lot. And yeah, I those spaces up here are so fun, but we really aren't as effective
Oh, definitely.
as light workers, as healers.
You know, I've talked about this openly and I've caught flack from people about it before, but my body spontaneously healed from coma with the miraculous help of my teams and the light. However, although my organs recovered, my lungs, being a severe asthmatic, have stayed extremely sensitive. I have severe neuropathy in the jaw and the areas where I was chewing on the intubator over and over. And so I have physical conditions still, and sometimes they rev up. And as a highly sensitive, they can create dramatic fluctuations in the bodies. And I've had people say to me, well, if you're doing all of this and you're doing all of that, why is this happening? But the reality is, that's my soul's blueprint. These physical lessons are just what you just talked about with your addictions. Every time one comes through, I say, welcome, friend. What are we in for this time? What do you got to teach me? And then when I come out of that, I serve it as medicine to others. And that is exactly why some of us have recurrent things, yet also have the tenacity and the resilience to step up and share them. I meet those with a lot of love and pride versus shame, which is how others have presented them to me.
Yeah. Gosh, that's so beautiful. And I've interviewed many near-death experiencers and those who've remembered their pre-birth memories. And Christian Sundberg always says every time I interview him that it's about how we meet these experiences.
Completely.
And that's where our choice is, right? We can choose to welcome it, or we can choose to meet it with shame or rejection or something like that. And every time they arise, we we have another choice. So have
Exactly.
fun, right?
Yeah. Hey, it never gets dull.
Right. We're never bored. Yeah. So I know I was really curious more if there was any more that was present with this vision that they gave you around this time that we're going through. So when you talk about your timeline, that I went to treatment in 2008 and I for treatment for an eating disorder, and then I got sober in 2013. And so when you talk about the timeline, I noticed just having a ton of curiosity around what else they may have showed you or what wasn't said about this vision or anything that you got telepathically or just an inner knowing about this halo around the earth.
For me, they kept showing the number 10, or it's how I received it, was the resonance of 10. And, I for years, I've taken like meticulous notes. The scientist dork in me loves to take notes. And so for years, I've kept journals of any random thing that comes through. And one thing that I would notice was 10 kept coming up, and it just didn't make sense to me. And I started speaking in 2019. And then, of course, 10 years later, the pandemic hits. And I now understand that the 10 was an awakening period for humanity, almost like the switch had been flipped and now game on. Okay. So referencing what you said about the timeline and when you were in treatment, I have spoken with so many people on so many different paths. I just taught a Tantra meditation workshop up in Sausalito, California. And it was really fascinating because we had like quantum physicists, we had psychologists, we have meditation teachers, yogis, people that don't fit like myself, like, that are all over the place. But one thing we all noticed when we told our stories was this synergy and synchronicity in timelines. Being major events tend to occur 2007, 2008 up until about 2010, almost like pre-awakening experiences for people. 2012, volume goes way, 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 way up. Then there's a latency period where everybody seems to kind of be messy and trying to figure out what's going on. 2019, a lot of people start being like, okay, now I'm called to service. I'm going out there. And then boom, 2020 hits. Okay. So it's very interesting that all of these people from all of these trajectories seem to be in some sort of sync. The way that it unfolds, it was very different.
Yeah.
Okay. But for each person, that timeline was congruent. I don't get into prophecy or there's one indefinite outcome to anything because my guides have continuously shown me that we're a multidimensional, interdimensional being and that everything is quantum, everything is co-occurring, which means there's multiple potentialities at any given time. And one little shift could potentially influence many other things. However, what was clearly communicated to me in that space was that light would prevail. They still never, ever make me question that. I personally choose to not follow the news and all of the programming that we're being indoctrinated with. However, I have a steadfast knowing that despite the amount of years it takes for things to shift, we are the victors. It's certitude. No reason to, I don't even listen to the fear porn. I'm just like, whatever. I've got it on a higher authority. You guys fight that out. Peace.
I love that.
Yeah, but there's a definite knowing. There was something really important too about the oneness, like unity. I've never talked about this actually, but I've never been able to understand. They've always shown me this book, and it's like a golden book, and it's like illuminating, and it's really pretty. And then there's all these like beautiful animal totems that always come in, like very powerful totems, like the jaguar, the dolphin, the snake, and this book. And the way that I receive it is that all of the cosmic knowledge, like all of the divine knowledge, somehow integrates or informs a higher understanding of the eternal of the infinite, and it is one. Instead of being separate into, all of these dogmas and all of these paths and all this infighting. And so I find great peace in that too. And I don't really feel or know that it's important to know what the book is. It's just really a message of hope. But borrowing from the Mayans and other cultures, it does definitively feel from their communication in that space that it is a golden age, that it is a time of just really evolution and us being embodied high vibrational beings. And with that embodiment of this particular vibration, the vibration that they transmitted to me and that I always feel when I'm doing this work and they come through, in that vibration, all of this lower density cannot exist. It just flushes it out. And so that's brought me a lot of peace this past year with everything that's going on politically and whatnot. I'm just
Yep.
like, I'm just gonna keep that's my news. I'm just tapping into that and I'll just focus on that. And I'm not advocating for lack of discernment or lack of involvement or anything. I'm just saying be very careful what you choose to take your under the influence of. Just like drugs and alcohol or food, we're going under the influence of. Everything we consume, we are under the influence of. And the more under the influence of it you are, the more you become it.
Thank you so much for that. I agree 100%. And I had to stop with all the political stuff happening, I had to stop. Like, I had to go off TikTok and, because I was like, I'm just consuming this stuff and I'm not happy about this, and it doesn't feel good. So I completely understand. And when you mentioned that timeline, I overdosed in 2012 and I got sober in 2013. So it just, I don't even know what it is I'm getting right now, other than like what you said, we're in that golden age. And the way that you described, yeah, back in 2010, we could not have conversations like this as openly. I mean, we were at choice. We could have done it. We have free speech, but it wasn't as accepted. And so I do see that, there is this global, like, conscious shift. There's an awakening and we are moving towards the light. And I noticed just feeling so calm and happy and excited when you said the light always prevails. So thank you for sharing that. I know
Oh,
we've been talking for a while and I feel like I could just, pick your brain for hours. But to wrap up, I have 3 questions that I ask all my guests. So
okay.
the first question is, how do you define God or source, or however you refer to the all?
The all. Oh, that's a tough one because it truly, to me, source or God, whatever. I mean, whatever words, it's ineffable. It's beyond our language. Yet the closest is unconditional love. It's just unconditional love. I always call the creator my divine parent because in the household I grew up in, like shame and judgment were a big part. But I know my divine parent doesn't judge, just loves, just accepts exactly as you are. All is welcome.
That's beautiful. The second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
Purpose of life. Really, I get this question from clients all the time, whether they wanted to know themselves or for, everyone. I'm gonna piggyback on the divine parents answer. At the core of it all, it's love. All of these things that we encounter, all of these obstacles, all of this suffering, they become blocks wherein we forget our own true nature, our own reality as the divine parent itself, because we are fractals of it. And so it's really to return to love
Yeah,
and to serve love.
yeah, I agree. And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
Mm. Not to compromise yourself, not to allow the external to program the internal.
And how do people find you if they want to work with you or get in touch with you?
My website is www.brooke with an E, Grove, Grove, healing.com. So it's brookgrovehealing.com. I have a contact page there that you can reach me at.
Well, thank you, Brooke. I will include that in the description of this show, so anyone who feels called to reach out can do so easily. And I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so glad that this finally happened. I know that between all of our kids and life, it was hit and miss, and we finally hit. And this was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story here, for sharing your story and your knowledge and your wisdom everywhere, like in the documentary that you're working on currently, and so many other platforms. It's been such an honor, and I just appreciate you being you in this world. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Christina.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.